event as part of the Society for Ecological Restoration's global online conference. In opening this morning, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm joining you from here in Borroloo, Perth, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. It's an important aspect of our work in biodiversity conservation and ecological restoration to really engage with and understand the enduring connection to country that our traditional owners have and the privilege that we have to work with the traditional owners of these lands. This morning, we're joining with many of our collaborator institutions in launching the guidelines for embedding experiments into ecological restoration. And perhaps today's session should be retitled From Big Issues to Big Opportunities in Biodiversity Science. We have a growing opportunity for restoration as the global narrative turns to net nature positive and a pressing need to act quickly on restoration while developing experiments and extending our understanding of how to best implement restoration on country. So the opportunity of embedding experimental design into restorative practice is a great one. Before I hand over to the presenters, I'll just let you know a little bit about WOBSE. We're a joint venture of 10 partners, including university, government, CSIRO, and the West Australian Museum. And we really operate to address the big issues in conservation that are pressing on our state and on our state's biodiversity, working with all the stakeholders around those questions in collaborative multi-stakeholder endeavours, addressing those complex issues. And so today's presentations really fit well with the mission of WOBSE to develop end-user driven collaborative research outcomes and embedding that in practice on the ground. I can't go on without plugging some of our other work. Do, if this is your first encounter with WOBSE, explore our website, explore some of our publications across a range of issues from cryptic subterranean fauna through to feral and invasive pests and the restoration economy. So without too much more from me, I'll hand over to our facilitator for the day, Dr. Renee Young, to introduce our panelists who are all authors on today's guidelines and will introduce the presentation to you. So over to you, Renee.
Thank you very much, Owen. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here today to launch the experimental guidelines. This document has been many years in the making, and so it's wonderful to finally be launching it with you all. Thank you all for joining us. We've got a fantastic panel here with us today to field your questions and share a little bit about the content that's in the document and show you where you can find it, to download it. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our wonderful panel. First up, we have Dr. Lucy Commander. Lucy is an environmental research superintendent at Alcoa. She's a restoration seed ecologist and has spent over a decade undertaking scientific research within the mining industry to help improve environmental performance. She's led multiple industry-facing guidelines and publications, and she was heavily involved throughout the duration of this project, as well as a contributor, editor, and project manager. So thanks for joining us, Lucy. Next up, we have Linda Broadhurst. Linda's recently retired from CSIRO and has spent the last 20 years researching how to improve the conservation and restoration of native vegetation across southeastern and southwestern Australia. Her interests include improving seed sourcing practices to maximise the evolutionary potential requirements to meet the challenges of environmental change, restore lost ecological processes such as dispersal, enduring long-term population persistence, among others. Linda is the primary author on the guidelines. Welcome, Linda. We also have Suzanne Prover. Suzanne is a senior principal research scientist with CSIRO. Her interests include managing and restoring the natural diversity, ecosystem function and resilience of vegetation communities, with long-standing interest in balancing production, cultural and economic values within nature conservation, particularly in the temperate eucalypt woodlands. So welcome, Suzanne. And last up is Keith Bradbury. Keith is the CEO of Gondwana Link and a long-term advocate for the ecological values of the southwest of Western Australia, as well as the strength of grassroots and is the strength of many grassroots-led projects locally. As a community-based activist in the early 1980s, he helped hold the clearing of some 3 million hectares of public land for marginal agriculture as a concerned local, and was involved with establishing some of the earliest landcare groups in Australia. Keith has just released a paper on towards achieving quality restoration in Southwest Australia, something I've just had a quick look over and a fantastic resource. So well done on that one, Keith, and thank you very much for joining us as well. Many of you on the call will know these authors. They're all leading experts in this field, and just a snapshot of the expertise that has contributed to this document. I'm going to hand over to Lucy as the project manager. She's going to walk us through an overview of the content of the experimental guidelines, so you can see what we talk about in the document, and just whet your appetite to go and have a little look after the webinar. So thank you very much. Welcome to everybody, and I'll hand over to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Renee. Thanks for the lovely welcome. Can everybody see my slide? Ren, can you just let me know? Looks good. All right, great. So I'm really excited to be here today to launch these guidelines, and it's really great to see now we've got 101 people on the call today. So hello to everybody, and welcome from all the lands that you come from around Australia and around the world as well. Linda and Suzanne and Guy Boggs invited me to be a part of this journey some time ago, and it's great to see this come to fruition. It's a wonderful set of guidelines, and we will be posting the link in the chat so that you can go and download them afterwards. So ecological restoration is undertaken by a lot of skilled practitioners, but also a lot of newcomers to the space. And we're expecting an increase in restoration in the next few years and few decades as well. We're part of the UN Decade for Restoration at the moment, and it's certainly something that's in the spotlight. So this book talks about the opportunity to embed experiments in restoration projects, and also for a coordinated network of experimental sites. If you're going to be doing restoration anyway, why wouldn't you embed an experiment? And then you can learn from that restoration project. You can do adaptive management on your own site, but then you might be able to scale up and look at commonalities and things that work across sites, and maybe things that don't work across sites as well. And I guess maybe I'll just pause at this point and be very respectful to the people out there who are already doing restoration and have been for many more decades than me. I certainly don't want to tell anybody what to do, but I think what is really amazing about this book is that it's really brought a combined set of knowledge and skills together in one place. And I think that's very valuable for anybody who's doing restoration. Some of us are very much specialists in a particular technical field, and it's great to be able to have resources to look at other parts of the field as well. And for newcomers to this space, it's great to be able to give a recent graduate or a new technical officer this book, and they can go away and learn for themselves. I think, like I said, this adaptive management story, it's really good to be able to measure the outcomes to tell a success story and improve on restoration methods, particularly if you've got a long running restoration program. This is aimed at anyone who's designing and implementing restoration projects, whether it's local or state or federal government, consulting, industry, land care, natural resource management, or non-government organisations as well, both in Australia and also across the world. So in the contents, we've got 6 chapters plus a 7th chapter, which contains 9 case studies. We had 36 authors and editors and also 6 reviewers as well. The introduction basically sets the scene. It talks about what we mean by ecological restoration, why we need guidelines, why it's important to have this kind of nationally coordinated learning infrastructure and data as well. It provides advice for policy, science and practice, and it helps with collaboration from all sectors. It talks about who should read the guidelines and also what's in it. And just a little note, I've put the authors for each of the chapters down in the bottom in green. The second chapter talks about the value of science partnerships, how you might go about identifying partners and recognising the different forms that partnerships may take. Perhaps this might be funding partners or in-kind or community partners. And it talks about how you could enable and facilitate these partnerships as well. The planning chapter in Planning 3 is really an essential component of the restoration activity. It talks about how you establish goals and aims and objectives as part of this planning process. And it talks about the importance of planning early, as early as possible within the process. It also talks more about partnerships and seeking advice from researchers or other practitioners who might be able to help with planning as well. Chapter 4 explains experimental design. It can talk about different types of experimental designs, different types of treatments, and highlights the importance of using a control as well. Talks about randomisation and replication, and explains that sometimes the best experiments are the simple ones. These are refined experiments that can have data that's really straightforward to interpret. It also talks about the importance of scaling up and how you can have multiple experimental sites to increase the capacity to generalise these findings across your site, your region, or across the nation. The monitoring chapter talks about monitoring design, practicalities of monitoring, and also provides a bit of a checklist as well so that you don't forget anything. It talks about different types of monitoring, so targeted monitoring where you go out and collect specific data, or maybe surveillance monitoring to just look at general aspects of the trial over time and look out for any surprises that may happen along the way. It talks about timelines and making sure you, I guess, plan ahead for success and think about how long you may wish to monitor for. It also talks about what data you're gathering. And on the subject of data, Chapter 6 talks about managing that data. It's a bit of an introduction to data management, how you might curate the data and ensure that it's collated and stored so that you can hand it over to the next person who might be in charge of the project. And it also talks about how you might be able to analyse that data and also share it. Chapter 7 is a series of 9 case studies from across Australia. It's got some great pictures and it's amazing to see all of these different types of restoration projects. So I'd just like to finalise by saying thanks. You can have a look at these set of guidelines. Here's the link down here. You won't be able to click on it, but I think somebody will pop it into the chat so that you can. And I just, on a personal level, like to thank all of the authors and reviewers for their generosity and expertise. It's been great fun to work with everybody through this journey. So really, this is your book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That's a great overview of the content of what's in the book. You'll see there that it covers a lot of content. We can't discuss all of it within, a short 15-minute speaking slot. So yeah, do go have a look. It's a really well-written document. Just personally, Chapter 4 is just fantastic. It's such a clear explanation of how to set up your experimental design, and I think it's one of the few pieces of work that I've read where I've actually read it and it's very, very clear and easy for everyone to understand. And the case studies are fantastic. It's just so great to learn through sharing of knowledge and experiences and being able to relate that to your own. So we're going to move into a panel session. I've got a few questions for the editors and authors and reviewers, but please feel free to pop your questions in on the chat and we'll come around to those shortly as well. So I guess just to open, and I wanted to ask this because this document started even before I was at WABSI, so that was a while ago, and I'm really interested to hear how did they come about, and what was the initiator that got this piece of work going? And I might throw, I don't know, I think Linda and Suzanne, you were there at the start in those early conversations. Do you have some insight as to where they came from?
Thanks, Renee. It's Linda here. I'm happy to have a start at that, and Suzanne can fill in the blanks. So I would say this has been a 10-year journey for us. It came from we had a small internal CSIRO workshop on Black Mountain, and out of that came a comment of, wouldn't it be great if we could do these big embedded experiments across sort of the southeast, and that sort of mulled away for a while. And then eventually Suzanne was getting questions about setting up experiments in WA. I was getting similar questions about setting up experiments and how to do monitoring in the east. And we kind of got together and it started from there. We thought, actually, if practitioners are asking the questions, they need a way to actually do the experiments. And that's, as I remember, because it is a 10-year journey, how it all kick-started. And so we were able to get funding from all those funding bodies that Lucy put up for us. And we were able to bring together, and I think this is why it was so valuable for us, is we actually got that research government practitioner interface into the room in Canberra. We had about 30 plus people who could come into the room. And one of the great things about that was we actually paid them to come. We paid for their airfares and their accommodation. We couldn't pay for their time, but we could pay for them to come. And then there were a whole raft of other people who couldn't come for various reasons that still could contribute into the process. So we felt that way we could get a lot of buy-in, and we could produce a document that would be really practical and useful. Suzanne, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, that's a great start, Linda, especially from the on-ground perspective. So I guess I can add from the, the more sort of policy perspective. So as you say, this has been a long journey, and one of the things that a couple of other workshops that we attended really showed that both practitioners and governments who have invested in restoration would really like to be able to tell their success story about, what's been achieved over the last 30 years. And often there is, there is data on where a project was or how much fence was put up, but there's very little about the outcomes of the things that we've done. So one of the drivers was really to have enough well-designed monitoring in the ground to be able to say, well, all those things we did have had a positive ecological impact. And the other, of course, is we all know that we're not always successful. And so we want to learn from, the things that aren't working as well. So we want to create the opportunities to improve what we do. And, one of the reports we did at CSIRO called the Knowledge Bank of Ecological Management Effectiveness also showed that there's actually very, very little documented scientific evidence for the effectiveness of the things we do on the ground. Individuals who are doing the work can see what happens and see where it is working and it isn't, but we need that bigger picture of knowing where to invest in what does work and where we need to work on improving.
Right. Wow, and I love the fact that this is a grassroots and has come up from their project. Thank you very much, and it's so insightful. I didn't realise that it had been ongoing, essentially starting 10 years ago. That's incredible. I'm going to shift, and I think about where we are now. So we're currently in the decade of ecosystem restoration. Just last month, we saw the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures hand down their final recommendations. And this is driving nature markets, and we're seeing a lot of sort of external commentary around ecological restoration and how it's going to increase activity. I wonder, are you seeing an increase in activity yet that is coming from those, or will we see that increase? And yeah, do you have any sort of thoughts around what's currently happening and what do you think is going to be happening moving into the future. And I might go to Keith. You're on the ground engaging with multiple stakeholders across landscape scales. So what's your sort of understanding of what's happening right now and where we're heading?
Thanks, Renee. Well, I'm not sure of the influence those sort of global manoeuvrings are having, but certainly in terms of securing land for restoration and getting restoration happening, it is accelerating. The last couple of years in Gondwana Link have been the biggest by far in terms of hectares and boots hitting the ground. And that's primarily Australian funders, and an increasing interest from companies, but they've got their eyeballs on carbon and looking at how to keep costs low. Whereas I think, I know there's a range of private investors who are very active in how do we achieve the ecological benefits, the cultural benefits, the community benefits, all in one package. And I'll probably come to this a bit more. It's an increasing theme. How do we not just achieve plant restoration, if you like, habitat restoration, but how do we get the wildlife coming along in there as well? So the growth we're seeing the last 2-3 years, I suspect, is the beginning of that much bigger wave.
Yeah, that's really sorry. Yeah, jump in, Suzanne.
Yeah, that's great, Keith, to hear that from the ground level. I mean, I can talk more again from the the top down. So as Renee mentioned, there's just an amazing amount happening at the moment, both nationally and globally, that shows every sign of having a huge impact on the amount of ecological restoration that's going to be undertaken. So, not only is it the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, but we've got the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was signed off by about 195 countries around the world. That's committed to 30% of degraded lands being restored by 2030. So that's a really high goal. And I know, for instance, Brazil has committed to 12 million hectares of restoration under that framework. And Australia has committed to it. We don't yet have a clear path on what that means. And similarly, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures and Australia's Nature Positive Plan will play a big role in bringing, not just government-funded restoration, but bringing into industry into restoration with a focus on biodiversity. So, we have a number of things that are emerging in Australia, may not yet be fully in place, but things like the potential nature repair market and potential certification of biodiversity on farms, and the need for industry to report on its biodiversity bottom line, all will be really strong drivers, I think, of restoration in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Lucy, I know that you have been engaged with thinking about natural capital recently, and how that's intersecting with business. And do you have anything else to add to that sort of component around how industry is responding?
I guess from my perspective, from the last 20 years, it does look like that restoration is more in the spotlight and people are more interested in it. And there are more players as well. With the rise of, carbon plantings and other sort of types of restoration or restorative activities as well. So I think it's really interesting to watch this growing space. And I think, there's a little bit more scrutiny about what people are up to, and just echoing Suzanne's comments about how it's really great that people are starting to think about, showing the outputs rather than just the inputs as well. And so all of this kind of information that we're providing about, data management and communication as well, I think will be really helpful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's a unique sort of environment that we're currently in, where we're seeing such interest from on ground and land care and increase in society about the value of nature and biodiversity and how we intersect it and the value of it within our areas, right through to government and organisations and the requirements that they need for reporting and to manage sustainably for social license. It's quite an interesting dynamic. And I guess just on that, how important is it when we're doing these kinds of restoration activities? Is it going to be to try to embed experiments into those plantings? And I might go to Linda.
Thanks, Renee. So I think it's very important, but then of course I'm biased, having helped write the guidelines, but it did come from a place where people were interested in doing the experiments, and so what we wanted to do is provide the best possible guidance that we have. And I think we've provided guidance that's could be across a paddock, could be a small, as big as your backyard, could be a specific species, could be a multiple species. That was the idea, is that people could do an experiment using these guidelines. Of course, it's not compulsory, but a lot of people now need data-driven reporting. So, if you start an experiment and you can gather data over time, you have a really good case to your funders to go, oh, we know this works. How about we scale it up? Oh, we know this doesn't work, but we think this will. Let's try this approach and see how we go there. Naturally, I think it's really important that we start thinking in this experimental framework where we can and where it's practical. If it's impractical, we can't do it. But if you think carefully and do that initial planning, and I would even go to the point where you might want to plan for an experiment that you actually have no funding for, but we all know how funding runs. It rolls out really fast often. You get like a month's notice that there's going to be this funding stream. If you have a series of things already set up, you can hit the ground if you've already designed your experiment and you've thought about where your seed might come or your plants or whatever. So I think it gives people really the help to actually do that forward planning when they've got a little bit of spare time, if they happen to have 5 minutes.
If we have spare time, oh my goodness. I think that's fantastic advice, and absolutely. And Suzanne, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, just to sort of add to that, there's actually already quite a lot of funding. Well, most projects are associated with, a proportion of the funding for the project should be set aside for monitoring. But there, a lot of that, people are just told to do some monitoring and not really given any guidance on how to do it and where to do it and how to design that monitoring and what to measure and so on. So not only, Linda mentioned doing things without funding, but it's also about, better use of the funding that we do have to invest in monitoring to actually get the answers that we need. So the guidelines are about helping people to, do what they're doing and get more out of it, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope that it becomes the little handbook that everybody has in their back pocket to refer to make sure that we are setting them up properly and maximising the opportunity that we have. In the guidelines, we talk quite a lot about partnerships and the importance of partnerships, and I wonder, do you have any sort of experiences that you could draw on that where you've had a really strong partnership and that has and what's made that effective and what's made that work, and did it result in a successful restoration outcome? Or and I've noticed in the chat a couple of questions around this as well, are there also examples of where maybe a partnership hasn't worked, and if you've got thoughts, maybe why that wasn't successful? So I'd be interested to get your perspectives around, what makes a good partnership, and is that key for successful restoration? Any sort of thoughts around that intersection, and And maybe Keith, you want to open or share any thoughts there? You've probably got multiple examples of on-ground pieces of work and a range of experiences in this space.
Yep. Yeah, it's certainly a range of experiences, and perhaps I'd start by saying that all this is wonderful, but it's the social sciences that I think are absolutely pivotal to ongoing success and growth of this sector and of the work that is so needed on the ground, and the dynamics between organisations and egos and various, requirements of the various different organisations, and it's a bit of a jungle. Probably the stronger partnerships we have with place-based organisations. The locals aren't going anywhere, and even when we disagree, we know we've got to work together. And that is often a personal relationship too. People who've known and worked together and trusted each other over long periods of time are by far the best partnerships. And the larger organisations can help larger things happen, but you're also at risk that someone in a coffee shop in Collins Street or George Street, Sydney, or somewhere will change their mind, and that'll ripple through to the people you're working with on the ground. And it's very hard to, write the legal partnership document and hold people to it. One of the best partnerships we've had, as an example, and in the research line, is with Nick Dunlop, when he was with the Conservation Council, came flying in with some crazy ideas he'd been stewing over for 20 years. We now have really good data on wildlife use of the spectrum of restored areas across Gondwana, and we know that paying attention to the ecological values is really important. And we know the opposite for the poorly structured ones, and that's a mixture of a friendship and knowing each other for long periods of time. The other quick thing I'd just like to add, that I'm really keen to see a strengthening. I'm almost resiling from saying between practitioners and researchers, because I think there's got to be more of a coming together. And I don't know any good practitioners who aren't also strong researchers in their own way. They just may not talk they may not write the sort of papers that the Dean likes and that gives you academic promotion sort of thing. So there's a real opportunity to mesh much better there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I hope that we see more of that coming through. And yeah, what a great example to draw on with Nick Dunlop, and a legend and a great piece of work that he has built over the past 20 years. I love that one. Anybody else want to share anything about partnerships or experiences that you've had?
I can build on Keith's comments there, especially building on that link to scientists. So clearly this is you need partnerships for this work, because we need the practitioners who know what they're doing on the ground, and we need the scientists who can help understand and help with the design and understand and analyse data and all of that. And they may be in the one person, or they may be a group of people. And we also need engagement from, the policy makers or the investors who want to know about, the success of what they're investing in. And I guess I can give an example there where we've recently run a pilot with the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, and with CSIRO and TERN, the Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network, and many NRM practitioners around Australia through the Regional Lands Partnerships Project. where we've piloted actually establishing one of these embedded experimental research networks around Australia. And that one was focused on post-fire ecological trajectories. It was in the wake of the Black Summer, so there was a lot of interest in understanding the outcomes of this, partly of this big natural experiment, but also other types of fire regimes. So we established a pilot network to really trial this idea of embedding experiments and working in that three-way partnership with practitioners and policymakers and scientists. And that's nearly 3 years in that project now, and we've got 19 sites around Australia. We've had really strong training programs and monitoring protocols that have and the NRM practitioners have really done a fantastic job coming to the party and learning how to and giving feedback and improving on the monitoring protocols and the design and so on. So yes, we're hoping that can be a bit of a model for how to, sometimes it's most appropriate to do an experiment at a single site, but also how to really ramp that up so you get levels at both local to regional to national scales.
Yeah, that's excellent. What an incredible project coming out from such a terrible period of time. Is that available, or I mean, you're 3 years in, you probably don't have a lot out yet, but is there somewhere people can go to find out about that piece of work you're doing?
Yeah, there is a website that you can go to, and as you're right that the final reports and so on aren't out yet, but there will eventually be a publication amongst all the practitioners contributing to that publication. Yeah. So yeah, I could put a link into the website on the chat.
Into the chat, that would be fantastic. Okay, I can see some comments coming and questions coming in, and I do want to give some time, so I'm just going to ask one final question around if someone's thinking about setting up a restoration project, and we've touched a little bit about this in the conversation already so far, interested in incorporating experimental design, what key pieces of advice would you give somebody that's thinking, all right, I'm going to do a project, what do I need to test and how do I go about testing that? Lucy, you've got multiple years of experience in this space, so I might go to you in the first instance.
Sure. Well, I guess like Linda, I mean, we've all got a bit of a bias, right? But for me, I would say that the planning phase has got to be one of the most important. I mean, some people will say the data curation phase is the most important, but I think planning, set yourself up for success by making sure that you have adequate time to plan, really think through the practicalities. I guess echoing Keith's comments about, scientists versus practitioners versus, I mean, I'm not really sure even what to call myself these days if I'm what I am. Do we, having scientists embedded within organisations that are doing practice, I think that's a great thing as well. However you identify, whether you identify as a scientist or a practitioner or both, I think definitely having a really good planning phase, making sure you identify all your partners, making sure can you even get seeds? How long is it going to take to grow the plants? Do you have good site access? Do you have all the permits? All of those things. Are you engaging with the traditional owners? Have you talked to the neighbours? All of those sorts of things, making sure you're setting yourself up for success, not just the planning for implementation, but planning for monitoring. How long are you going to monitor this for? If you've only got a year for monitoring, you're only going to look at emergence or, first summer survival. Do you want to do this for 20 years? Do you have enough money? Are you still going to be alive? Who's going to be there? All of these things. So I think really thinking through the whole project from beginning to end, but also leaving a bit of wiggle room for those surprises or those opportunities that come up if somebody comes to you and says, hey, let's do a linkage grant, or, oh, hey, I've got some school kids that want to participate, being flexible as well. But yeah, I would definitely say that making sure that you have really solid planning phase, planning for implementation, planning for monitoring, and planning for communication. That's something I can see some comments in the chat about communication and failures. And I think that's really interesting. And so having a communications plan before you even start, I think would be amazing as well, to say, how are we going to tell people about this? Are we going to have a YouTube channel and post regular updates? Are we going to have a Facebook page about it? Are we going to have a newsletter? Are we just going to go to the pub and talk about it? Like, what is your communications plan, and understanding who would be interested and targeting the communications for that, and thinking outside the box, not just thinking that we're all trying to be publishing science and nature papers. We can publish short publications in a bulletin, or, you know, we can do fact sheets, or we can do case studies in national guidelines. So I think, yeah, definitely planning for all of those things will set you up for success.
That's a fantastic response. And I don't think I've got anything to add to that. Does anybody else? It was a good sort of thought. Anybody else want to talk? Yeah, Keith, go for it.
Can I just quickly throw in that not only are we in the decade of restoration, we're in a climate and ecological emergency. And I think it's really, really, really important to say to say what's important to know. And you know, we get numerous offers fly past to delve into the detail or something, but you know, what are the fundamental questions that help us accelerate quality restoration? And to me, it's where's the sweet spot between reversing the trend and the bush can then repair itself, or spending $10,000 a hectare to get something that looks rather wonderful in year 5. And with the expansion of restoration activity, I'm already deeply concerned that the quality standards are slipping because everyone's in a mad rush to get hectares. So we now need to discard our own interest, if you like, if I can use that phrase, probably the wrong one, but focus on what is absolutely critical for accelerating good restoration in this critical time in the history of life on Earth.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that is the resounding message that we need to take from this. And thank you for adding that perspective, Keith. And I think that's where we'll draw the line in all of my questions, because I could sit here and talk to you about the guidelines for hours, but I do want to go to everybody else as well. So I'm just going to circle back to what Lucy was talking about there around communication. Helena Mills has popped a couple of questions in around how do we encourage practitioners to share their information and their data, and also failures as well as the successes. So how do we try to promote that within industry? How do we make it easy as well? Because everyone is busy and we need to be able to easily share that information. So does anybody have thoughts around that?
I can make a start.
Sure.
Renee, it's quite a complex question, so you could come at it from many angles, but you know, one of those is, well, you know, hey, let's make this a partnership from the start, and you know, this is what it's all about, working together and not feeling threatened about outcomes that aren't ideal. Rather, you know, everyone from investors through to practitioners recognizing that there's always room for improvement, and that's what it's about. It's about celebrating success and being able to improve when it doesn't work. And if we build that in from the start and make it non-threatening, I think, you know, we'll have, and also if we coordinate from the start so that the data sets being generated much more easily talk to each other, you know, they're more consistent methodologies, they might have a consistent design like in the MER network approach, then you're just putting your piece of data into a larger data set that's contributing to a national story, and we want to know what that story is, you know, whether it's positive or negative.
Absolutely. I'm just going to go to the next question here. which I think is really quite interesting and something a lot of people have been talking and thinking about, which is around, do you think it will be beneficial for us to establish a centralised national online platform dedicated to documenting and tracking various restoration projects across the country? Such a system could help prove invaluable in helping us gain comprehensive overview of restoration efforts, enabling us to establish connections with leaders and facilitate collaborative efforts, including data and knowledge sharing. So I might just open to the panel. Has anybody got thoughts around a centralised platform? Do we have anything like this or that exists where we can share our stories, or even if it's not national, internationally as well?
You go, Keith.
Oh no, best of luck with that one. I think there's been numerous efforts over the years, and somewhere deep in me, I actually think that the whole concept of centralising knowledge like that, which should be so easy in the computer age, it just doesn't work. It doesn't gel. And I try and find the best pubs to go to and talk to people, and that's how I keep myself informed. Other methods you're welcome to try.
I think things are starting to come together. So I agree with Keith to some extent that, we're unlikely to get everything all on one platform. I think that, the department, our National Environment Department is certainly interested in having, a better record of those kind of experiments through the things that the department invests in. If we do end up with a national network of on networks, so to speak, network of monitoring, evaluation and research experiments, I would envisage that they would certainly, be highly suitable for having together in a platform. So perhaps it might not be one platform, but perhaps there might be, a smaller handful of platforms that people can use to share their findings and outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are, I guess that's kind of what I was thinking about is, we do already have a few of these that exist nationally and internationally, and it might be that, there's various mechanisms. And I think, but Keith, I think that you're right as well. I think it's around sharing in the way that you think is effective to share with your network, whether that workshops or at the pub or through literature or online. I think whatever's appropriate for the project and an effective way for your story is one of the best approaches. And Lucy, that goes back to your point around a communication plan. Maybe you don't want to formalise it as a communication plan, but well, just how am I going to share this story and this knowledge with my peers?
Can I quickly add? And
yeah,
Linda mentioned before how she paid our costs to go to the initial workshop in Canberra, and that was great. The workshop was a bit different than I expected, but gee, I had some wonderful conversations, and I've kept contact with some of the people I met there. And we've got this publication, and someone just put up the Restore Global platform. We're pretty frenetic making this happen. So if people would like us to share and communicate and collaborate and hug each other and all those wonderful things, then we can't do that for free because there's just too many people wanting us to do it. So the way Linda started this whole process was great.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does. I appreciate like the time and the resources that it takes to pull something like that off. So that was an incredible effort to get everybody there. And I think it also speaks to getting people around the table and in the room together, as opposed to having all of our conversations online. Online is fantastic, for reaching people that we can't access and wide communication, but there is the significance of sometimes being in the room together and making sure that you know, a lot of the times that's when you can get great outcomes. Linda.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think Keith makes a really good point, and it's often quite difficult for practitioners to get to conferences where really important information is given out, because A, they don't have the time, it's the wrong time of year, or they don't have the resources. So opening up like video platforms to practitioners, I think, is a really helpful way of doing that to and fro, having more conversations. Because I agree, I think it's all about conversations to start with, unless you get those right. And unless you go back to Keith's, you know, what are the fundamental things we're trying to do in this decade? Because this is our window. You know, it's going to be a lot harder after this decade to do all this stuff. You know, what are the things we need to do now? And that can, I think, only come from conversations. We need to agree on those things.
Yeah, it's really, really valuable insights. So I'm just going to go back. Sorry, I'm just going through the comments back and forwards a little bit. So there was one from Eddie that I wanted to go back to as well, and it's when we began monitoring programs in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was no examples of the application of BACI design, BACI, into monitoring. It was often the case that one of the components was missing from the design, and it usually was adequate baseline data set. This is not something that's likely to come out of any EIA study, but very important component to trying to compare and assess progress. What are the thoughts of the panel on the process that may even precede restoration, so around data? Anybody? It's a nice meaty one to jump into right towards the end.
I think you're absolutely right, you know, and that's an important part of the planning and the design, that you do collect, if possible, you can't always, that you do collect pre-treatment data. You can learn a lot from that. And the BACI design has, you know, pre-treatment, but it also has control. So I think if you have the combination, you have your control where you don't do anything, or you do business as usual. That's a really important element of the design. And in those plots, you can collect pre-treatment data, then you can account for any sort of pre-treatment variation. So having both, I think, is important, because, you know, your trajectories over time require that you have the counterfactual in the control plot where you didn't do anything, which isn't necessarily going to stay the same as it was either. So those two elements, having pre-data, having a control or at least a contrast of some sort, as well as having replication, I would say, are three critical things in when you design an experiment to ensure that, you know, your data will be meaningful and tell you the answers you want.
Yep. Off you go, Keith. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, if I can throw in there, I mean, we could be talking about plots, little 10 metre by 10 metres or whatever, or much bigger. And our key interest here is the 10-year picture, the 100-year picture, the 1,000-year picture, and where we're heading. And I just want to put in a plug for what Suzanne did with her initial work out in the Great Western Woodlands, almost before it was called that. She talked to the locals. She caught up with the Nudju people and worked out what fire regimes were once like, and then did that ongoing work, which, as you know, Suzanne, I think is spectacular, on what has been the fire regimes in the Great Western Woodlands we need to restore back to. And wacko, you know, gimlet stands are over 500 years old. And I often rely on historical information. You read the explorer journals, and understand how wide space the Jarrah Forest was and how full of woylies it was, because they used to scare the horses. So that's not plot data, but and I don't even know what a Archie is. I thought they were a chocolate. Anyway, but
I think
I
it's
think
a
there is
design
different
principle
sources
before,
of
after,
information
control and
around.
impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, sorry, Keith, I didn't mean to cut you off there. And absolutely, yeah, using those resources, and I think it's fascinating to go back and actually read these historical records and people's accounts of what the landscape was like, even if it's not a scientific publication or experimental design, we can still gain a lot from that information. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to draw this webinar to a close. Thank you so much, Linda, Keith, Suzanne and Lucy, for all of your efforts in bringing this document and this book to publication, all of the authors and the editors and the reviewers that contributed to it. There was many of you involved in the process, so thank you very much. If you haven't had the chance to look at the document, please do download it from the WOBSE website. I'm sure it will be available elsewhere in the future as well, and think about how you're going to embed experimental design into your project, or how you might team up with somebody to do that in an area that interests you. So apologies if I didn't get through all the questions in the chat, but I did see some great discussion going back and forwards between you. So really appreciate all of your thoughts and comments and link sharing. Thank you again very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening if you're joining us internationally. The rest of the SCR 2023 virtual conference. It's great to have this webinar as a side event to that conference that's currently going on. And please do reach out if you've got comments or questions, and we can forward those on to the relevant people. Thank you very much, and good morning.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.